The mediator, a man named Arthur with a face worn smooth by 1,000 shared sorrows, looked from Liam to Sarah. The air in the conference room was thick and stale, smelling of cheap coffee and expensive regret. It was the final session, the final division of a life built together, now being dismantled piece by painful piece. On the polished mahogany table between them lay the ghosts of their marriage. A list of assets, bank statements, the deed to a house that no longer felt like a home. Sarah, her posture ramrod straight in a cream-colored business suit that cost more than Liam's first car, tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the document. Her lawyer, a shark in tailored silk, sat beside her, a portrait of bored confidence. "We've agreed on the house, the car, the savings," Arthur said, his voice a low, tired drone. "Now, regarding Mr. Harrison's prospective business assets." Sarah let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a sound of mirth, but a finely honed weapon of dismissal she had perfected over the years. "Business assets?" she repeated, the words dripping with a condescension so potent it seemed to stain the air. "Arthur, let's be serious. What assets are we talking about? His collection of dusty architectural manifestos? His half-finished sketches for cities that will never be built? The grand Project Zero he talks about in his sleep?" She leaned forward, her eyes, once the warm brown pools Liam had fallen into, now cold, hard stones. "Let me make this simple for everyone. I don't want to waste another minute of my life haggling over fantasies. I'll take my share of his potential." She paused for dramatic effect, her gaze sweeping over Liam, cataloging his slightly worn suit jacket, the exhaustion in his eyes. "I'll take zero." The word hung in the air. Zero. It was not an offer. It was an insult, a final public branding of his worth in her eyes. Liam's lawyer, a young, earnest man named Peterson, started to object. "Ms. Vance, the term zero is legally ambiguous. We should quantify." "No," Liam said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the room's tension. Everyone turned to him. He had been silent for most of the meeting, a statue enduring the slow erosion of a storm. He looked directly at Sarah, ignoring her lawyer, ignoring the mediator. He saw the triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She thought she had delivered the final, crushing blow. She thought she had won. He didn't know then that the word she had used as a weapon would one day become his shield and his sword. He didn't know the incredible, staggering irony that was taking root in that sterile room. All he knew was that she had just given him the only thing he truly wanted. A clean break, unburdened by any future claim. He held her gaze. "Zero," he repeated, the word tasting strange on his tongue. "I accept." He watched the flicker of surprise in her eyes before it was replaced by smug satisfaction. She thought he was admitting defeat. She thought he was acknowledging his own worthlessness. She didn't know that zero wasn't a number. It was a name. It was the name of the revolutionary urban planning software he had been developing in every spare moment for the last 2 years. It was the culmination of his life's work, his passion, his singular vision. Sarah thought zero meant nothing. She didn't know it was the name of the most important thing Liam had ever built. Within 3 years, that single word, uttered with such casual cruelty, would be worth $200 million, and she would have absolutely none of it. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd love it if you could hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more tales of justice and vindication. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to how it all began, long before the 9-figure valuations and public reckonings. Let's go back to the beginning of the end. The end had started not with a bang, but with 1,000 quiet cuts. It began in the sprawling, perfectly manicured gardens of Sarah's parents' estate, at a Sunday dinner that felt more like a corporate board meeting where Liam was the failing subsidiary under review. Robert Vance, Sarah's father, was a man carved from granite and ambition. He had built a real estate development empire through sheer force of will and a ruthless pragmatism that left little room for what he called dreamers to Robert. Liam, with his master's degree in architectural theory and his passion for sustainable urban design, was the king of dreamers. That particular Sunday, the air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and condescension. They sat on a white wicker-furnished patio overlooking a lawn so green it seemed to mock the natural world. Eleanor, Sarah's mother, a woman who weaponized pleasantries, was discussing Sarah's recent promotion at the marketing firm she joined through a family connection. "We're just so proud," Eleanor chirped, placing a delicate hand on Sarah's arm, "to see her thriving. It's so important to have a clear, profitable career path." Her eyes flicked to Liam, a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments. Robert, swirling a vintage port in a glass that probably cost more than Liam's monthly grocery bill, took his cue. "Indeed," he boomed, his voice accustomed to filling rooms and silencing dissent. "Clarity, that's the key. You know, Liam, I was talking to a fellow at the club the other day. He runs one of the biggest architectural firms in the city. He told me they're not hiring theorists anymore. They're hiring people who can build skyscrapers, not write essays about them." Liam felt Sarah shift beside him. She wasn't defending him. She was bracing, embarrassed by his mere presence. The humiliation was a familiar cloak, heavy and suffocating. "I believe there's value in both, Robert," Liam said, his voice even. He refused to let them see the sting. "Value?" Robert chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "The only value that counts is the kind you can deposit. What's the return on investment for a sustainable city model? Good feelings? A pat on the back from some environmental group?" He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Let me give you some free advice, son. Drop the art project. Come work for me. I'll put you in the acquisitions department. You'll learn what real building is about. It's about land, capital, and leverage, not trees and bicycle paths." Sarah, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Dad, we've talked about this." It sounded like a defense, but Liam heard the exhaustion in her voice, the weariness of having to apologize for him yet again. She wasn't defending his dream. She was trying to manage his embarrassing lack of her father's kind of ambition. I know," Robert said, waving a dismissive hand. "He's passionate. But passion doesn't pay the mortgage on a house in this neighborhood, does it?" It was a direct hit, and it was meant to be. They lived in a beautiful home, a wedding gift from her parents, a golden cage whose bars Liam felt closing in every day. He wasn't paying the mortgage because there wasn't one, a fact Robert loved to wield as proof of Liam's inadequacy. Later that night, the silence in the car was heavier than any argument. Liam drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He could feel Sarah's disapproval radiating from the passenger seat. "Why do you do that?" she finally asked, her voice tight. "Do what?" "Antagonize him. You know what he's like. You could just nod, agree, say you'll consider his offer. It would make things so much easier." "Easier for who, Sarah?" Liam asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Easier for you? So you don't have to be embarrassed by your husband, the theorist? Is his approval so important that you're willing to watch him dismantle me, my work, my entire sense of self, and say nothing?" "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, turning to look out the window. "He's just trying to help. He sees potential in you, but you're too stubborn, too proud to take it." "He doesn't see potential," Liam shot back, the quiet control finally snapping. "He sees a fixer-upper, an asset that's underperforming. He doesn't want to help me, Sarah. He wants to assimilate me." "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing," she cried, her voice cracking with a frustration that had been building for years. "Maybe it would be nice for once to have a partner who is on the same team, to go to my family's home and not feel like I have to apologize for my husband's career choices. To have a husband who earns more." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and exposed. More. It was always about more. More money, more status, more of the tangible success her family worshipped. His passion, his intellect, his vision, they were all worthless in their currency. That was the night Liam stopped trying to make her understand. He retreated into his study, the one corner of the house that felt like his own. He pulled out a simple, leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with complex algorithms, architectural sketches, and flow charts. On the first page, in neat block letters, was the title, Project Zero. It was his code name for the software he was designing, a program that could simulate the entire life cycle of a city, factoring in everything from traffic flow and energy consumption to social equity and environmental impact. It was a tool for architects and planners to build smarter, more sustainable, more humane cities. He called it Zero because it was about designing from a clean slate, from the foundational point of nothing, to create a perfect, optimized something. It was also a private joke, a nod to how his in-laws saw his net worth. That night, as he sketched and coded, the name took on a new, more defiant meaning. It was the value they placed on him, and he would one day show them just how much that zero was worth. The months following that disastrous dinner were a slow, agonizing descent. The divorce papers, when they arrived, were less a shock and more a formality, the official acknowledgement of an end that had occurred long ago. The mediation session was the final public ritual of their uncoupling, and Sarah's theatrical declaration of taking Zero was her parting shot, designed to humiliate him one last time. But as Liam walked out of that conference room, leaving behind his lawyer who was still sputtering about legal precedents, he didn't feel humiliated. He felt a strange, unfamiliar lightness. For the first time in years, he was free. Free from the crushing weight of the Vances expectations. Free from Sarah's disappointment. He was a man with, in the eyes of the world they occupied, nothing. And he had a project called Zero. The symmetry was not lost on him. He moved into a small, sparsely furnished apartment on the other side of town, in a neighborhood with more character than curb appeal. His world shrank to the size of a single drafting table, 2 powerful computer monitors, and the 4 walls of his small living room. The grand house, the expensive cars, the country club memberships, they had all been part of Sarah's world, a life he had been visiting, not inhabiting. His new life was Spartan, but it was his. He sold his car, a sensible sedan Sarah had always called aggressively average, and used the money to buy a high-end server and to pay the first 6 months' rent. He lived on instant noodles and coffee, his days and nights blurring into a single, continuous stream of code, data analysis, and digital modeling. The leather notebook was his constant companion, the repository for every breakthrough and every frustration. He was building his city of the future, not with bricks and mortar, but with lines of code. The software grew more complex, more powerful, more elegant with each passing week. He was creating a digital twin for urban environments, a sandbox where planners could test radical ideas without laying a single brick, saving billions of dollars and decades of time. It was revolutionary, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Sarah's life, as seen through the distorted lens of social media, bloomed with ostentatious success. A month after the divorce was finalized, she was posting pictures from a whirlwind trip to Paris with her new partner, a private equity vice president named Julian Croft. Julian was everything Liam was not. He was slick, confident, and unapologetically materialistic. His Instagram was a curated gallery of Swiss watches, Italian sports cars, and first-class boarding passes. He was, in essence, a younger, more handsome version of Robert Vance. Sarah's family was ecstatic. They ran into each other once, about 6 months after the divorce. Liam was at a small, independent coffee shop, the kind with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, meeting with David Chun. David was a former professor of Liam's, a brilliant mind who had left academia to become a legend in the venture capital world, known for his uncanny ability to spot genius before anyone else. He was the only person Liam had trusted with the full scope of Project Zero. Liam had his notebook open on the table, explaining a particularly complex algorithm for modeling public transportation efficiency. David was leaning in, his eyes alight with understanding, asking sharp, insightful questions. The processing power required for real-time simulation is immense, David noted, tracing a diagram with his finger. How are you solving the latency issue? That's the core of the IP, Liam explained, excitement coloring his voice. I'm not trying to solve it with hardware. I'm solving it with a predictive algorithm. It models probable outcomes based on a cascading series of variables, so it's not rendering the entire city at once, just the most likely quadrant of impact. The bell above the door chimed, and a familiar, high-pitched laugh cut through the quiet hum of the cafe. Liam's heart sank. It was Sarah, flanked by her mother and her new fiancé, Julian. They were a vision of expensive, coordinated neutrals, looking utterly out of place amongst the students and freelancers. Sarah saw him. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before reforming, wider and brighter than before. It was a performance. She steered her entourage toward his table. "Liam, I can't believe it. What are you doing here?" she said, her tone implying he had somehow wandered out of his designated habitat. "Hello, Sarah. Eleanor," Liam said, nodding politely. He stood up, a gesture of ingrained civility. David Chun remained seated, observing the interaction with a calm, unreadable expression. "And you must be Julian," Liam said, extending a hand to the man who had replaced him. Julian's handshake was firm and brief, a gesture of dominance. "Good to finally meet you," Julian said, his eyes flicking from Liam's simple sweater to the worn notebook on the table. "Sarah's told me a little about you." The implication was clear. "She's told me you're a nobody." Eleanor, ever the diplomat of passive aggression, peered at the complex diagrams in Liam's notebook. "Oh, are you still drawing your little city maps, dear? It's so nice to have a hobby." "It's not a hobby, Eleanor," Liam said, his voice level. "It's my work." Of course," she said, patting his arm with a pitying smile. Sarah, meanwhile, was looking at David Chun, who was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored jacket. She didn't recognize him, but she recognized the quiet aura of wealth and influence. "I'm sorry, we haven't been introduced," she said, turning the full force of her charm on him. "David Chun," David said, his voice neutral. He didn't offer to shake her hand. The name meant nothing to them. To the Vances, influence was measured in real estate holdings and society column mentions, not in disruptive tech portfolios. "Well, we mustn't keep you from your work," Sarah said, the word a clear jab at Eleanor's comment. "We're just on our way to look at wedding venues. The country club, actually. Julian just sponsored their new tennis pavilion." She looped her arm through Julian's, a gesture of possession. "It's amazing what's possible when you're not just dreaming, isn't it?" They swept out of the coffee shop, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and smug satisfaction. Liam slowly sat back down, the energy draining out of him. The encounter had left a bitter taste in his mouth. He looked at David, expecting to see pity. Instead, he saw a glint in his mentor's eye. "Her father is Robert Vance, of Vance Development, correct?" David asked. Liam nodded, confused. "Yes. Why?" David took a sip of his espresso. A slow smile spread across his face. "No reason," he said. "Just connecting some dots. Now, you were saying something about predictive algorithms? Don't let them distract you, Liam. What you are building here, they have no idea. Let them have their tennis pavilions. You're building the future." David leaned across the table and tapped the notebook. "And I want to fund it. Not a hobby. Not a project. Company. We'll call it Zero. We'll incorporate tomorrow." A year bled into the next. The incorporation papers were signed, and Zero Architecture Systems was born. David Chen's seed investment, a modest sum by venture capital standards but a lifeline for Liam, was deposited into a newly opened business account. It wasn't enough to hire a team or rent a fancy office, but it was enough to upgrade his servers, subscribe to essential software, and, most importantly, to stop living on instant noodles. It was validation in its purest, most liquid form. Liam worked with a monk-like devotion. His small apartment became a crucible of innovation. Whiteboards covered every wall, filled with equations and system architectures. The floor was a minefield of empty coffee cups and discarded technical manuals. He was a man possessed by a vision, and for the first time, he had the resources, however limited, to pursue it without compromise. He coded. He refined. He ran simulations. He broke the software, found its weaknesses, and rebuilt it stronger, faster, more efficient. He was creating a tool that would allow city planners to see the invisible. With a few clicks, Zero could model the ripple effects of a new subway line on local businesses, the impact of a new zoning law on housing affordability, or the long-term environmental consequences of a new power plant. It could simulate decades of urban evolution in a matter of hours. It was a crystal ball for cityscapes, and it was getting more accurate every day. He remained invisible to Sarah's world. They moved in different universes now. Hers was a world of galas, charity auctions, and weekend trips to the Hamptons, all meticulously documented on Julian's social media. Liam's world was one of code repositories, beta testers, and late-night video calls with a small, dedicated group of urban planning experts David had connected him with. These experts, initially skeptical, were quickly becoming Zero's most fervent evangelists, using the beta version of the software in their academic research and singing its praises in closed-door industry forums. A quiet buzz was beginning to build around Zero, a whisper in the corridors of power that the Vances and their ilk could not hear. It was a new kind of power, one not built on concrete and steel, but on data and intelligence. The announcement of Sarah and Julian's engagement was a spectacle. A full-page feature in the city's most prominent society magazine, complete with professionally shot photos of the happy couple gazing lovingly at each other against the backdrop of Julian's penthouse apartment. The ring, a diamond the size of a small bird's egg, was described in excruciating detail. The article mentioned Sarah's family, the Vances, a veritable real estate dynasty, and Julian's position at a prestigious private equity firm. Liam was mentioned once, in passing, as Sarah's former husband, a footnote in the grand narrative of her ascent. The engagement party was the social event of the season, held at the Vance family estate. Hundreds of guests mingled on the immaculate lawns where Liam had once been so thoroughly dissected. He wasn't invited, of course, but he saw the pictures. Sarah, radiant in a designer gown. Julian, smug and proprietary. Robert Vance, holding court, a king in his castle, celebrating the merger of his daughter with a more suitable corporation. Liam saw the photos on a night he finally cracked the software's most persistent bug. While they were toasting their good fortune with vintage champagne, he was celebrating his own victory with a lukewarm cup of coffee, a triumphant scrawl on a whiteboard his only witness. He felt a strange sense of detachment, not envy. Their world seemed flimsy, their joys performative. He was building something real, something that would last, something with substance. He had a brief, awkward phone call with Sarah a few weeks later. She needed him to sign a final piece of paperwork related to the transfer of the house title. Her voice was brisk, efficient, the voice she used with assistants and service people. "Just have it notarized and overnight it to my lawyer's office," she instructed. "The address is in the email." "Okay," Liam said. There was a pause. He could hear the faint clinking of glasses in the background on her end. "So," she said, a forced, casual tone entering her voice. "How are things? Still working on your project?" The word hung there, the same condescending label she and her family had always used. "Things are good," Liam said calmly. "The company is going well." He heard a faint, muffled laugh. She was talking to someone else in the room. "He says his company is going well," he heard her whisper, followed by another, deeper chuckle that he recognized as Julian's. She had forgotten to cover the receiver. She came back on the line, her voice still carrying traces of amusement. "Oh, that's great, Liam. Really. I'm happy for you. Well, I have to run. Julian is taking me to dinner. We're celebrating. He just closed a massive deal." "Congratulations," Liam said, the word tasting like ash. "Thanks. It's a different world, you know? Playing with real money. You wouldn't understand." The line went dead. Liam stood in the silence of his apartment, the receiver still pressed to his ear. "You wouldn't understand." The phrase echoed in his head. It wasn't just an insult. It was a thesis statement for their entire relationship. She had never understood. She had never wanted to. She and her family saw the world through a keyhole of their own making, a tiny aperture that only showed wealth, status, and material possessions. They were blind to anything else. He looked at his computer screen, where a beautifully rendered, three-dimensional model of a city district was rotating silently. It was a neighborhood in a developing nation he was helping to redesign pro bono, using Zero to optimize water distribution and emergency service routes. It was work that would save lives, work that had meaning. It was a world she couldn't even conceive of, let alone understand. He put down the phone. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, but it was a distant fire now, a banked ember rather than a raging inferno. It no longer consumed him, fueled him. He went back to his keyboard. He had work to do. He had a future to build. And he was getting closer every day. The 2 years that followed were a study in contrasts. Sarah's life was a public spectacle of consumption. Liam's was a private pilgrimage of creation. The second year after the divorce marked the quiet launch of Zero's commercial version. It wasn't a splashy, press release-driven event. It was a strategic, targeted rollout to a handful of major architectural firms and municipal planning departments, organizations handpicked by David Chun for their forward-thinking leadership. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The software sold itself. Planners who had spent their careers wrestling with spreadsheets and outdated CAD programs were suddenly handed a tool that felt like it had been beamed back from the future. Zero didn't just visualize data. It provided insight. It allowed users to ask, what if on a citywide scale? What if we invested in green roofs across the downtown core? Zero would model the impact on energy consumption, air quality, and stormwater runoff, generating a detailed cost-benefit analysis in minutes. What if we pedestrianized a major commercial street? Zero would simulate the effect on traffic patterns, retail revenue, and public health. The company, which was still just Liam in his apartment, albeit a slightly larger one he'd moved into, began to generate revenue. First, it was a trickle, then a steady stream. He hired his first employee, a brilliant young programmer he poached from a tech giant, convincing her to take a pay cut in exchange for equity and the chance to work on something meaningful. Then he hired a small support team. He still lived simply, a habit born of necessity that had become a principle. He reinvested every dollar of profit back into the company, into research and development, into making the product better. He had no interest in the trappings of success. The work was the reward. Sarah, in the meantime, had married Julian in a ceremony that was less a declaration of love and more a merger and acquisition. Their life together was a relentless performance of affluence. They bought a larger penthouse. They vacationed in St. Bart's and Dubai. They were featured in another magazine, this time for a profile on power couples. In the article, Sarah talked about her synergy with Julian. "We're both driven," she was quoted as saying. "We understand that you have to be aggressive to get what you want in this world." Her father, Robert, was immensely pleased. Julian was the son-in-law he'd always wanted. He brought Julian onto the board of Vance Development, and together they embarked on a series of ambitious, high-leverage projects. They were men of the old world, building empires of concrete and debt, utterly oblivious to the digital revolution happening just beyond their gilded horizon. Liam had one more encounter with Robert Vance before the world changed. It was at an alumni event for the university they had both, coincidentally, attended decades apart. Liam was there at David Chen's insistence, who had endowed a new chair at the School of Architecture and wanted Liam to meet the faculty. Liam was in a quiet conversation with a renowned professor of urban economics when a heavy hand clapped him on the shoulder. It was Robert Vance, his face flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. "Harrison, didn't expect to see you here," Robert boomed, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Thought you were above this sort of networking stuff." "Robert," Liam said, his tone neutral. "Good to see you. Heard you're still tinkering with that computer program of yours," Robert continued, oblivious to the distinguished academic standing next to Liam. "Sarah tells me you've even got an office now. Good for you. Gotta start somewhere, I suppose." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible. "Listen, if you ever get tired of playing games and want a real job, my offer still stands. We're breaking ground on the new waterfront project. Real steel, real glass. Things you can touch. Might be good for you. The professor, a woman Liam deeply respected, raised an eyebrow. Robert, she said, her voice crisp and academic. You're talking to the man who created the Zero platform, aren't you? Robert blinked, momentarily thrown. Platform? It's a program. A piece of software. It's the single most disruptive technology to hit urban planning in the last 50 years. The professor corrected him gently. The work Mr. Harrison is doing is going to redefine how your real steel and glass get put together for the next century. We're rewriting our entire curriculum around his work. Robert stared from the professor to Liam, a flicker of confusion on his face. The concept was too foreign for him to grasp. His world was divided into big players and small fries, and he had long ago placed Liam in the latter category. This new information didn't compute. He defaulted to his usual tactic. Dismissiveness. Well, that's all very interesting, I'm sure, he said, already turning away. Good to see you're keeping busy, Liam. He clapped him on the shoulder again, a gesture of paternalistic dismissal, and moved off into the crowd, in search of someone who spoke his language of profit margins and property values. Liam watched him go, a strange sense of pity washing over him. Robert wasn't just arrogant, he was obsolete. He was a dinosaur gazing up at the sky, admiring the pretty light of the approaching meteor, completely unaware of its significance. Don't mind him, the professor said to Liam. Men like Robert Vance are very good at building the world as it is. They have no imagination for the world as it could be. That's your job. She was right. The 3-year mark approached. It was the quiet before the storm, a period of intense, heads-down work for Liam and his now-growing team. Zero Architecture Systems had moved out of his apartment and into a modest, open-plan office in a converted warehouse, the kind of space that signaled serious tech startup, without the frivolous expense of slides and nap pods. They now had 20 employees, programmers, urban planners, data scientists, all fiercely loyal to Liam's vision. The company was a quiet juggernaut. It had captured nearly 70% of the market share among North America's top architectural firms. Municipal governments from Seattle to Singapore were licensing the software, using it to redesign their cities for a new century. Yet, the company remained stealth. Liam had turned down all press inquiries, declined all awards. He and David Chun had a strategy, a carefully orchestrated plan that was about to enter its final phase. The whispers in the tech and finance worlds had grown to a roar. Who was behind Zero? How had they achieved such market dominance so quickly and quietly? Speculation was rampant. Tech blogs wrote breathless articles about the mysterious unicorn that was revolutionizing a multi-trillion-dollar industry. Liam remained the calm center of the storm. He was still the first one in the office and the last one to leave. He still preferred to eat lunch at his desk. He had more money in his personal bank account than he'd ever imagined, but his lifestyle had barely changed. He had bought a comfortable but not extravagant house, and he had finally replaced his old, worn-out suit with a few well-made jackets. The only real luxury he allowed himself was a top-of-the-line espresso machine for the office. His focus was absolute. They were on the verge of launching 030, a version that incorporated artificial intelligence and machine learning. It was a quantum leap forward. The new version didn't just model outcomes. It could generate novel solutions. A planner could input a set of goals, reduce traffic congestion by 20%, increase green space by 15%, maintain housing affordability, and the AI would generate hundreds of viable, fully rendered design options in the time it took to make a cup of coffee. It was the culmination of everything Liam had been working towards. And David Chun had decided it was time to take the company public. The IPO was being prepared with military precision. But first, they needed a coming-out party. A way to officially announce their presence to the world, not just the niche industry they inhabited. The opportunity presented itself in the form of the Global Urbanism Summit, the most prestigious conference in the world for architects, developers, and city officials. The keynote speaker, a world-famous starchitect, had fallen ill at the last minute. The conference organizers were in a panic. David Chun, who sat on the board of the foundation that sponsored the summit, made a call. "I have a replacement," he had said. "You've never heard of him, but he's the most important voice in architecture today. His name is Liam Harrison." Meanwhile, in their gleaming penthouse overlooking the city, the cracks in Sarah and Julian's perfect life were beginning to show. Their marriage, built on a foundation of status and financial synergy, was vulnerable to market fluctuations. And the market had not been kind. The high-leverage real estate projects that Julian and Robert had championed were in trouble. A sudden spike in interest rates had turned their ambitious ventures into toxic assets. Julian, who had always been the picture of effortless success, was now tense and preoccupied. He spent his evenings staring at his phone, his jaw clenched. The easy laughter and grand romantic gestures were gone, replaced by short tempers and long, angry phone calls with bankers. Sarah found herself living with a stranger. The charming, confident man she had married was gone, replaced by a worried, irritable ghost. Their beautiful home felt less like a castle and more like a gilded cage, the silence between them echoing in the vast, empty rooms. She found herself thinking of Liam, a thought that was both unwelcome and persistent. She remembered his calmness, his quiet intensity. She had mistaken it for a lack of ambition, a passivity. Now she wasn't so sure. Her life, which had seemed so dazzling and successful, now felt brittle and hollow. She was dressed in couture, living in a palace in the sky, and she had never felt more insecure. The invitation to the Global Urbanism Summit arrived in a glossy, oversized envelope. Vance Development was a major sponsor, a holdover from better days. Robert insisted they all attend the keynote address and the gala that followed. "We have to maintain appearances," he had said, his voice strained. "Let the world see we're fine." Confident, Sarah, Julian, and her parents got ready for the event, dressing in their familiar armor of expensive clothes and forced smiles. Sarah scanned the program on her phone as they rode the elevator down. "Who is this keynote speaker?" she asked, scrolling. "Liam Harrison. I've never heard of him." Julian snorted. "Probably some boring academic. Let's just get through it, grab a drink, and be seen." Robert, however, had frozen. "Harrison?" he said, a strange look on his face. "Liam Harrison." "Yes. Do you know him?" Sarah asked. "It can't be," Robert muttered, shaking his head. "No. It must be a different Harrison. A common name." But as they walked into the vast, crowded auditorium, a knot of unease began to form in Sarah's stomach. This was Liam's world, the world of architecture and urban planning. The world they had so casually dismissed. A coincidence, she told herself. It had to be. They found their seats in the reserved front section, a prime location for the sponsors. The lights dimmed. The president of the summit walked to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president began, her voice echoing through the hall. "We are in for a rare treat tonight. Our original speaker, as you know, was unable to join us. But his replacement is a man whose work, though little known to the public, is already reshaping our world from the foundations up. He is the visionary founder and chief architect of a company that has, in just 3 short years, become the indispensable tool for city builders across the globe. A man who truly started with nothing, with zero, to build the future. Please welcome Mr. Liam Harrison." A single spotlight hit the side of the stage, and into its bright, unforgiving circle walked her ex-husband. He looked different, not dramatically so, but the changes were profound. The tired, worn-down look he'd had in the final years of their marriage was gone. He stood taller, his shoulders broader. He wore a simple, dark suit that fit him perfectly, a uniform of quiet confidence. He wasn't the man she had divorced. He was the man she had never bothered to see. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. In the finance and tech sections, it was a buzz of excitement and curiosity. The mythical founder of Zero was finally showing his face. But in the front row, where the Vance family sat, there was only a stunned, horrified silence. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her mind reeled, trying to process the impossible. Liam? Her Liam? The dreamer? The failure? the man she had so casually discarded. She looked at her father. Robert's face was ashen, his mouth slightly agape. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Julian, beside her, was staring at the stage with a look of dawning, sickening comprehension. He was a numbers man, a man who tracked markets and trends. He had heard the whispers about a stealth tech company called Zero that was about to go public with a monster valuation. He had even, she vaguely recalled, mentioned it at a dinner party. Dismissing it as overhyped, he had never made the connection. None of them had. Liam walked to the center of the stage to a simple lectern. He didn't seem nervous. He seemed calm. He looked out at the vast, darkened auditorium, his gaze sweeping over the thousands of upturned faces. For a fleeting second, his eyes met Sarah's. There was no anger in his look. No triumph. There was nothing. It was the look of a stranger, and it was more devastating than any accusation. He adjusted the microphone. A low hum filled the auditorium, the quiet before the storm. "Good evening," Liam began, his voice steady and clear, amplified to fill the cavernous space. "A few years ago, I had an idea. It was a simple idea born of a frustration. The frustration that the most complex, most important things we build as human beings, our cities, were being designed with the crudest, most outdated tools." He didn't use notes. He spoke directly, his words measured and confident. He wasn't delivering a speech, he was telling a story. He told the story of a young architectural student who dreamed of building better worlds. He spoke of the disconnect between the grand theories of urban design and the messy, data-poor reality of municipal planning. "We had the ability to model a car engine down to the last bolt, to simulate a financial market down to the microsecond," he said, his voice rising with passion. "But when it came to predicting the impact of a new park or a new highway, we were effectively guessing. We were gambling with the lives of millions, with trillions of dollars, with the future of our planet." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. In the front row, Sarah felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. This was the man she had called a dreamer. These were the ideas she had dismissed as a hobby. "So I started to build a tool," Liam continued. "A tool to replace the guessing. A tool to make the invisible visible. A tool to help us design not just more efficient cities, but more equitable, more sustainable, and more beautiful ones." Behind him, a massive screen flickered to life. It showed not a corporate logo, but a stunning, photorealistic animation of a city evolving, growing, breathing. Buildings rose, parks bloomed, traffic flowed like water in a stream. It was mesmerizing. "We called it Zero," Liam said, and his word, echoed through the auditorium. Sarah flinched as if struck. Zero. The word she had thrown at him like a stone. He had picked up and polished into a diamond. He spent the next 20 minutes demonstrating the power of the software. He showed how it was helping to redesign a slum in Mumbai, to create a carbon-neutral district in Copenhagen, to plan for rising sea levels in Miami. He wasn't selling a product. He was presenting a paradigm shift. The audience was captivated. The quiet buzz of excitement from the tech sector had spread, becoming a palpable wave of energy that filled the room. Robert Vance sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. As a developer, he understood the implications immediately. This tool made his entire business model, buying land, lobbying City Hall, and building based on gut instinct and favorable zoning, look like a relic from the Stone Age. He had been playing checkers while Liam was inventing three-dimensional chess. Julian was performing a frantic, silent calculation. He was connecting the dots, and the picture they formed was a nightmare. The rumored IPO of Zero, the insane valuations being whispered by his contacts at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, the mysterious founder. It was all clicking into place. He glanced at Sarah, his wife, the ex-wife of the man on stage, and a new, more personal horror began to dawn on him. Then, Liam moved to his conclusion. "The work is just beginning," he said. "But we have a strong foundation, and to help us build the next phase, to bring this tool to every city on the planet that needs it, we've decided to take the next step." He gestured to the screen behind him. The beautiful city animation dissolved, replaced by a simple, stark white screen. Text began to appear, line by line, as if typed by an invisible hand. Zero Architecture Systems announces a strategic partnership and initial public offering. Lead underwriter, Goldman Sachs. Projected valuation. The auditorium held its collective breath. The final line of text appeared, bold and undeniable. $200 million. The number just hung there. $200 million. It was a quiet bomb, and its shockwave radiated outwards. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then the room erupted. A roar of applause, of shouts, of people leaping to their feet. The press section exploded with activity. Reporters shouting into their phones. Photographers' flashes turning the stage into a strobing, chaotic scene. But Liam just stood there, calmly, at the center of the hurricane he had created. David Chun, who had been watching from the wings, walked out and stood beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. They shared a look, not of surprise, but of profound, hard-won satisfaction. In the front row, the world had tilted on its axis. The number on the screen seemed to mock them. $200 million. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion, regret, and a terrifying, dawning clarity. She looked at the man on stage, the man who was being hailed as a visionary, and saw not her failed ex-husband, but a titan. And she had let him go. For nothing. Worse than nothing. She had pushed him away, ridiculed his dreams, and in the final, defining act of their marriage, she had proudly, arrogantly, claimed her share of his future. Zero. The irony was so immense, so crushing, it was almost physical. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Julian grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "Did you know?" He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "Did you have any idea?" She could only shake her head, mute. Her father, Robert, was not looking at the stage. He was looking at his own hands, which were trembling. He had built his life on the ability to assess value, to see an opportunity where others couldn't. And the single greatest opportunity of his lifetime had been married to his daughter, had sat at his dinner table, and he had called him a dreamer and told him to get a real job. The scale of his misjudgment was so catastrophic, it threatened to undo his entire sense of self. The standing ovation went on for minutes. Liam simply nodded, a small, humble gesture that seemed to amplify his power, and walked off the stage, disappearing into the wings with David Chun. The chaos that followed was immediate. The house lights came up, but the spell was not broken. The air was electric. Everyone was talking about Liam Harrison, about Zero, about the $200 million number that was now flashing on every news site and stock market terminal in the world. For the Vance family, the auditorium had become a trap. They were prominent sponsors, seated in the front row. Everyone knew them, and now everyone was looking at them. Their faces a mixture of pity, curiosity, and schadenfreude. Business rivals who Robert had belittled for years were now staring at him with knowing smirks. Julian's competitors in the finance world were already texting each other. The news of his connection to the Zero story spreading like wildfire. His wife was the ex-wife of the man of the hour, an ex-wife who had gotten nothing. It was a joke, a brutal, hilarious joke to everyone but them. Sarah felt a desperate, primal urge to get to Liam, to talk to him, to what? What could she possibly say?
"I'm sorry.
I was wrong. Can I have some money?" The thoughts were a chaotic scramble. She stood up, her legs unsteady. "Sarah, sit down," Julian snarled, his public mask of the charming husband completely gone, replaced by the cold fury of a man who sees his own status plummeting. "Don't you dare make a scene." But she ignored him. She pushed past his restraining arm and started moving toward the backstage area, a salmon swimming against a current of well-dressed people. She had to see him. She had to understand. She saw a crowd of reporters and investors swarming around the backstage entrance, a human wall between her and Liam. But then, she saw him. He and David Chun were being escorted out a side door, away from the throng. He was moving with a purpose, his head held high. "Liam!" she called out, her voice thin and reedy. He stopped. He turned. He saw her. For a moment, their eyes locked across the crowded, noisy space. The whole world seemed to fall away. It was just the two of them, separated by 20 yards of empty space and 3 years of history. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was a distant, almost academic recognition. He was looking at her as he might look at a character in one of his urban simulations, a variable, a data point from a past that no longer had any bearing on the future. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, turned, and walked out the door, disappearing into the night and his new reality. The door swung shut behind him, a final, definitive punctuation mark. Sarah stood frozen, the sound of the closing door echoing in her ears louder than the roar of the crowd. Julian was now beside her, his face a thunderous mask. "Let's go," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Now he grabbed her by the elbow, his grip bruising, and steered her through the crowd toward the exit, a king and queen fleeing their fallen kingdom. The days and weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing unraveling for the Vance family. The story was too good, too deliciously ironic for the media to ignore. "The woman who took zero," one headline blared. "Tech billionaire's ex-wife got nothing in divorce," screamed another. The stories painted Liam as a quiet genius and Sarah as a materialistic fool, a narrative that was, to her horror, devastatingly accurate. Their carefully constructed world of status and appearance shattered. At the country club, conversations would halt when she and Julian walked in. Old friends suddenly became distant, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Robert's business partners began to question his judgment. "If you couldn't see what was right under your nose with your own son-in-law?" One of them had remarked to a colleague, a comment that quickly made its way back to Robert. "What else are you missing?" Julian bore the brunt of the public humiliation. In the hyper-competitive, alpha male world of private equity, perception is reality. He had postured as a master of the universe, a man who could spot a deal a mile away. Now he was a laughingstock, the guy whose wife had been married to the founder of Zero and had come away with nothing. The story implied a spectacular failure of due diligence on his part, not just in business but in his choice of a partner. The financial pressure mounted. The bad real estate deals, starved of the easy credit they had relied on, began to collapse. Julian, who had leveraged himself to the hilt, was facing ruin. The synergy Sarah had once boasted about had become a shared downward spiral. Their arguments became more frequent, more vicious. The penthouse apartment, once a symbol of their success, became a battlefield. "This is your fault," Julian had yelled one night, throwing a financial statement onto the marble countertop. "Your family's arrogance, your blindness. You were married to him. You lived with him. How did you not know?" "How was I supposed to know?" Sarah screamed back, her voice raw. "He was just Liam." He sat in his study and drew pictures. He talked about things that didn't make any sense. "What was I supposed to see?" $200 million. Julian roared. "You were supposed to see $200 million. That was the core of it." They only saw the world in dollar signs, and Liam's value had been, for so long, unquantifiable in their currency. Sarah, desperate, did what her family always did when faced with a problem. She hired a lawyer. A new lawyer, a specialist in reopening divorce settlements. The lawyer sent a letter to Liam's legal team, a carefully worded plea citing mutual mistake and unforeseen changes in circumstance. The response came a week later. It wasn't a long legal document. It was a single sheet of paper. It was a scanned copy of the original divorce mediation agreement. The section regarding Liam's business assets was highlighted in yellow, and next to it, circled in red ink, was a single, handwritten word, initialed by both Liam and Sarah. Zero. There was no other commentary. None was needed. The message was clear. The deal was the deal. The final, crushing blow came not from Liam, but from within her own family. Her relationship with Julian disintegrated completely, ending in a bitter, public separation. Vance's development, over-leveraged and mismanaged, was forced into a painful restructuring. Robert had to sell off prized assets, including the family estate, the very symbol of their dynasty, the place where Liam's humiliation had been a regular Sunday ritual. Sarah, now twice divorced and adrift, found herself living in a small condominium, a fraction of the size of the staff quarters at her parents' old home. Her social circle had vanished. Her confidence was shattered. She was forced, for the first time in her life, to confront herself without the armor of wealth and status. The reflection she saw was one she didn't recognize and didn't like. Liam, meanwhile, never spoke a public word about her. He never gave an interview about their past, never confirmed the salacious details in the articles. His silence was, in its own way, more powerful than any condemnation. He was focused on the future. His company, Zero, had a wildly successful IPO. The stock soared, and his personal net worth climbed to figures that were difficult to comprehend. But his life remained largely unchanged. He was still the chief architect, the visionary. He still spent most of his days working with his team, sketching in his notebook, dreaming of better cities. He did, however, do one thing. Through a foundation he established, he bought the struggling University School of Architecture, which was facing closure due to budget cuts. He didn't just save it. He revitalized it, endowing it with a permanent, massive grant. He built a new, state-of-the-art building for it, designed using Zero software, of course. He named it the Chun Harrison Center for Urban Innovation, in honor of his mentor. He took on a role as a visiting professor, spending one day a week with students, sharing his knowledge, nurturing the next generation of dreamers. The final scene of the public drama played out not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but on a quiet university campus. Sarah, having heard about the dedication of the new building, had felt an inexplicable pull to go. She didn't know why. A desire for closure, perhaps. A need to see the final result of the world he had built without her. She stood at the back of the crowd, wearing a simple dress and sunglasses, a face in the crowd. She watched as Liam, standing on the steps of the magnificent new building, spoke to the assembled students and faculty. He wasn't talking about money or success. He was talking about purpose, about the importance of having a vision and the tenacity to see it through, even when the world tells you it's worthless. True value, he said, his voice calm and resonant, is not something that can be given to you or taken away. It's not about the car you drive or the house you live in. It's about what you create. It's about the problems you solve. It's about the positive impact you have on the world around you, however small. He looked out at the young faces before him, his expression one of genuine hope. Don't ever let anyone tell you your dreams are worthless. Don't ever let anyone put a number on your potential, especially if that number is zero. Sometimes, zero is just the beginning. The students erupted in applause. Sarah stood frozen, the words washing over her. It wasn't a speech directed at her, but it felt like it. It was the lesson she had been forced to learn the hard way. She had spent her life chasing a superficial, brittle kind of value, while he had been building something real, something enduring. She turned and walked away before the ceremony ended, slipping away unnoticed. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. He hadn't sought revenge. He had simply succeeded. His success was her lesson. His vindication was her education. As she walked through the campus, she passed a young couple, students, sitting on a bench arguing. "But my parents think it's a waste of time," the young woman was saying, her voice full of passion. "They want me to go into finance, but I want to work for a non-profit." The young man took her hand. "Then you do it," he said fiercely. "It's your life, your work. Don't let them decide what it's worth." Sarah stopped and watched them for a moment. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile in a long time. It was a sad, knowing smile. The world was full of Liam's and Sarah's. She had played her part. And now, finally, she understood the script. She put her sunglasses back on and kept walking, with no destination in mind, for the first time in her life truly on her own, starting from zero. And what did you think about Sarah's journey in the end? Do you believe people can truly change after losing everything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Until next time.